Hi, I am Bharat Sharma from Steady Die Casting Solutions. Today we discuss about the terms used in die casting. Everyone referencing the subject of die casting may speak the same language. Clear communication is sometimes difficult, yet it is critical to successful die casting. Accumulator, a reservoir in the hydraulic system that holds the shot pressure at a constant level and reduces normal fluctuations. This is a cylinder that is usually located at the shot end of the die casting machine. Alloy, a metallic material that consists of two or more chemical elements whose physical properties are normally different than those of the separate ingredients. Area, projected, the area of the cavity and metal feed system that is visible when viewing the die at an angle perpendicular to the basic parting plane. Biscuit, excess of ladled metal remaining in the shot sleeve of the cold chamber process. It is a part of the cast shot and is ejected from the die with the runner in casting. Blister, a surface bubble caused by expansion of entrapped gas as a result of excess heat. Blowholes, voids or pores which may occur due to entrapped gas or volumetric shrinkage during solidification. This condition is usually evident in heavy sections. Filling ratio, volume or weight of usable casting product divided by the total volume or weight of metal injected into the die that is expressed as a percentage. Casting yield, the net number of acceptable castings that are produced from a production run compared to the gross number of shots. It is usually expressed as a percentage. Yield is also sometimes referred to as the ratio of total shot volume to net casting volume expressed as a percentage. Casting cycle, the total number of events required to produce a high-pressure die casting that usually consists of metal injection, including cavity fill, solidification, ejection, and die spray. Cavity fill time, the critical time that it takes to fill the cavity. This time has a profound effect upon the amount of premature solidification that occurs before the cavity is completely filled with metal. Clamping capacity, the ability of each tie bar to hold machine platens and die halves together during the injection of metal under high pressure. Also the number that describes the size of the casting machine. Cooling medium, the liquid either water, steam, or oil that is utilized to remove the heat conducted into the steels by the injection of liquid metal during each casting cycle. Cold shut, poor fill or surface finish in a die casting caused by low metal or die temperatures. Die life, the number of acceptable shots of castings that can be produced from a die casting die before it must be replaced or extensively repaired. Die lubricant, liquid formulations applied to the die to facilitate release after the casting is formed and to prevent soldering of the casting to the die surface. Die temperature usually refers to surface temperatures of die components that come into contact with the casting alloy. The temperature through the thickness of a die component is very complicated, and when dealing with the metallurgy of the die steels this term also applies to deeper temperatures. Dog leg, a cam that is designed to move a side core the appropriate distance and at the proper time. Dowel, a guide pin which assures registry between die components, usually located in opposite die halves. Draft, the angle given to casting walls, cores, and other parts of the die cavity to permit ejection after the shrinkage that occurs during casting solidification. Drag, a defect that occurs when a casting alloy adheres to the die steel during ejection and results in undesirable grooves in the casting. Dross, metal oxides that form either within or upon the surface of a liquid metal bath. Eject, to press the solidified casting away from the carene the die casting die. Ejector pin, a rod which pushes the casting off from cores and out of the die cavity. Ejector flash, a thin fin of metal that is formed during the cavity filling between the ejector pin and the mating hole. Ejector plate, a plate to which ejector pins are attached that activates them. Family die, a die that produces more than one distinct shape. Fan gate, a style of gate that is deemed to fan the metal stream out so that the fill pattern becomes wider as the liquid metal progresses into the cavity. Feed, a term that applies to the delivery of liquid metal to the die cavity. Also, it refers to packing extra metal into the cavity during intensification to compensate for volumetric shrinkage during solidification. Fill pattern, the configuration of the streams of metal within the die cavity that occur during cavity fill. Flash, a thin fin of metal which occurs at die partings, vents, and around moving cores. This objectionable metal is due to working and operating clearances in the die. Also a verb used to describe the condition that exists when the die halves are not held completely closed. Flow line, surface marks on a die casting that trace the metal flow pattern. Flow rate, the quantity of fluid per unit of time that flows through a specific conduit area. In die casting, this can refer to liquid metal, hydraulic fluid, water, etc. Fluidity, a condition that defines the ease that a liquid metal will travel through a conduit, at a given temperature, before it solidifies. Flux, a compound in powder form that is applied to minimize oxide formation upon the surface of a liquid metal bath. Gate, the orifice through which the casting alloy exits the runner and enters the die cavity. Also the entire ejected content of the die including casting, gate, runner, biscuit, sprue, overflows, vents, and flash. Hard spot, a dense inclusion in a casting that is harder than the surrounding matrix. Heat sink, a massive shape whose volume to surface area ratio is greater than the adjacent casting segment that has a greater capacity to hold heat. Ingot, casting alloy formed in a convenient shape for storage, shipping, or remelting. Intensification, a hydraulic process that increases the injection pressure, usually by a factor of 3, upon the metal after the cavity is filled to force or to pack more metal into the cavity to increase casting density. Nitriding, a heat treating process that is intended to improve the fracture toughness of die materials by diffusing nitrogen into the surface. Overflow gate, a passage that connects the cavity to an overflow. Oxidation, a chemical reaction between an alloy, like magnesium, an oxygen or an oxidizing agent. Plunger tip, the feed system component that applies pressure to the casting alloy and injects it into the shot sleeve. Port opening in the gooseneck hot chamber process, through which liquid metal enters the injection chamber. Pouring hole, opening in the top of the shot sleeve into which liquid metal is poured. Porosity, voids or pores in a casting that are caused by entrapped air, gas porosity, or volumetric shrinkage during cavity fill, shrinkage porosity. Preheat, the practice of heating a die casting die to at least 200 F above ambient temperature to minimize the thermal shock from the first few shots in a production run. Quink, the cooling in a bath, usually water, of a casting from ejection temperature 400-600 F to ambient room temperature 80-100 F. Also, used with relation to heat treating of die materials in a vacuum or salt bath, when dropping from austenitizing 1850 F to tempering 1200 F temperature. Quick die change, a procedure of standardization and efficiency to reduce the setup time of the die casting die. Remelt, process of melting back scrap in a breakdown furnace so that the liquid metal may be reintroduced into production. Rib, a wall perpendicular to another wall to provide strength or support. In die casting, ribs also are used to feed liquid metal within the cavity during cavity fill. They are also used to minimize twisting and bending due to uneven shrinkage. Runner, this conduit is the main part of the metal feed system that transfers the casting alloy from the biscuit, cold chamber, or the sprue, hot chamber, to the gate. Shot sleeve, the steel tube, in the cold chamber process, that holds the casting alloy and through which the plunger tip moves the metal into the metal feed system in the cavity. Shut off, the space on the parting plane of a die that provides an unrestricted area to apply the clamping force off the machine to seal off flash generation. Type bar, usually, but not always, there are 4 bars that are fastened to the 2 stationary platens of the casting machine. These bars stretch during each casting cycle to provide a locking force to hold the dies shut when high pressures are applied to the metal. Toggle, the linkage employed to mechanically multiply the force of the clamping system of the die casting machine when the platens are closed. Trim die, a die for punching or shearing the flash from the die casting. Undercut, recess or cord hole positioned perpendicular to the die parting that prevents ejection. Vacuum, a mechanical system that draws a partial vacuum within the cavity prior to, or in some cases during, cavity fill to assist in evacuating the cavity. Vent, a shallow passage off of the die cavity at the last place to receive liquid metal that allows air from the metal feed system to escape as the cavity is filled. Thank you very much for watching our video. Contact Steady Die Casting Solutions for your die casting solutions. Keep learning till death.